time for another better late than never review, and the reason for the delay with this particular 9th Doctor B&M exclusive set is because I initially didn't have any intention of actually purchasing it. I was already pretty satisfied with my 2005 version of the 9th Doctor in this scale. And I wasn't convinced that this retooled version was going to add anything particularly special to the collection. Also, having a holographic version of the Doctor is neither here nor there for me personally. And then reissuing what is possibly one of the weakest figures ever produced in this entire line in the form of Disco Rose, it wasn't a big sell for me. And sure enough, this set seemed destined to be something of a peg warm, and it wasn't long before this set was reduced in price, at which point I was tempted into picking it up because it does actually have some subtle charms to it that I think is actually worthwhile owning. So let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. Now this will be very familiar to anyone who's been picking up these B&M exclusive sets over the last few years. It's pretty bland in terms of its colouring and its design. It is mostly window display, which is fine, but it's a shame that there's no interior card art there to really help these figures pop out the packaging. And yeah, we have the image of the TARDIS there on the side, which is quite nice, but all in all, it's a little bit dull. Things don't really get much better on the side panel. It's nice to have this image of the TARDIS, but I think, if we could have actually had an image of the 9th Doctor here, this would have been pretty fun, and perhaps this could have been then consistent in the line, so you could stack these up on your shelf and made them look a lot more visually interesting. As it is, they're all going to look exactly the same, and only the description at the very bottom of the panel there is going to give it away. Now, this rather bland design does carry itself all the way to the back of the packaging, but in its defense, I do quite like Character Options' approach here by putting in a little bit of information about the particular set that we've got. So in this case, this is actually a bit of a broad overview of the 9th Doctor era, and I think this is actually quite a nice touch. Okay, so let's talk about this new version of the 9th Doctor. Now, this is actually a new sculpt. We have a new head sculpt, and actually some of the details on the costuming are also brand new. So if we take a closer look at this head sculpt, we can see that this is a fair approximation of a likeness to Christopher Eccleston. I don't think it's very sharp, I would say it's pretty soft, but I think it does a pretty good job, especially for this scale, which is 5 inches. So I think this serves pretty well. It's not the best likeness in this line, but it's not bad either. Now, if we compare this to the original 2005 release, it's up to you to decide which one you think is better. I think they're both got strengths and weaknesses, although I'd have to say I probably actually prefer the original sculpt over this new one. But it's not just the head sculpt that's brand new, because actually the jacket is a little bit subtly different as well. If we compare the two side by side, obviously we can see the new release on the left hand side here, and on the right hand side we have the 2005 release. We can see the design is actually ever so subtly different. This is actually a slightly different sculpt, and the material is different as well. They're both made of a rubber material, but the 2005 version is a lot stiffer and more restrictive, whereas this later version is a lot softer and more malleable. Of course, the paint taps are subtly different on both figures, and we can see that most noticeably here in the legs. Obviously, the new version has this sort of blue jean effect, whereas the original has the dark black jeans. Again, overall, I think my preference is actually the original release. Now, for those who are interested, I will run through the articulation. There is a straight swivel at the neck joint here. He also has a swivel at the shoulders, so his arms will lift up and down. You'll notice there is a bicep swivel as well, and we have a single joint at the elbow there. There is a swivel at the wrist, so the hand can rotate all the way around, and then we have another swivel at the waist, allowing that figure to move from side to side. Now, there is also a swivel at the hips, so those legs will kick forwards and backwards, and there is another single joint at the knee. Sadly, he doesn't come with any accessories, not even his sonic screwdriver, which is a little bit disappointing, but all in all, this is quite an interesting release. It's quite nice to have a brand new head sculpt for the 9th Doctor, so you do actually have a choice now, which is pretty cool, and I do like that there's actually other subtle differences to this figure, giving us a legitimate variant of this particular incarnation of the Doctor. Now, it's not the first time I've accused character options of cashing in on an opportunity, and I think this is a really good example of that, where they've given us the same figure twice in the same packaging, but one is a holographic version of that character. But in all seriousness, some people really do like these holographic versions, these transparent figures. I think this is absolutely fine. I think it's worthwhile. We do see a hologram of the Ninth Doctor, so I think this is just about legitimate, even if it does feel a little bit like a cash grab. But I have to say, I do really like this translucent effect, especially when we have this light passing behind it. It really lights up and it looks really quite good, actually. So all in all, this is actually quite a nice addition. I actually don't begrudge it too much. And for anyone who's interested how these figures stand next to each other, what they look like, you can actually see the key differences between them here. Obviously, the two figures on the right are the two figures in this new set, whereas the one on the left, of course, is the original 2005 release. But I think if we compare those two figures there, we can see the real differences between the initial release and this new release. It's actually quite striking when you put them next to each other. And then we come to this reissue of Disco Rose. She was actually the first ever action figure in this line, and as such, she is quite limited in terms of her posability, hence the nickname Disco Rose. Now, this is essentially just a repainted version of the initial release. There's nothing new here, and I think what galls me is the fact that they've come on such a great distance with their articulation and their body sculpts across the years, and I feel like they could have easily mocked up a brand new Rose figure with an improved posture and increased articulation. I don't think it would have been that hard to do that, and I think it's a real shame. This is a missed opportunity, and it just feels a little bit of a cash-in, really. A bit lazy and a bit disappointing. Now, all that being said, I actually think the head sculpt on this figure is pretty good. It's not a bad likeness by any stretch of the imagination, and I do feel that the paint apps are a lot better this time around. We can actually see some detailing, some wash running through the hair here to give it a bit more texture in, and I think this looks much better this time around. But let's take a look at the articulation. As you'll see, it's much more stripped down than we saw with the Ninth Doctor. There is a straight swivel at the neck, so she can move her head from side to side. There is a swivel at the shoulder there, so the arm will lift up and down. And then there's another swivel at the elbow that allows that lower arm to rotate all the way around. There's a swivel at the waist, so she can move from side to side. And then there's another straight swivel at the hip there, allowing the legs to kick forwards and backwards. But because of the way it's sculpted, she can only stand in one position. Alright, in terms of final thoughts then, this is actually not a bad set. I was initially going to pass on it, but I'm actually quite glad that I've got it now. I do appreciate having a brand new update to the Ninth Doctor. I think it's nice to have a legitimate variant in the collection. And I think the addition of the hologram version of the Doctor is the icing on the cake. It's a nice to have, but I didn't know I particularly wanted it. Let's put it that way. The addition of Disco Rose is disappointing. I think it would have been really nice to have had a Ninth Doctor era Rose, and I think it's a real shame that they missed this opportunity to give us this version of Rose with a decent body mould, some better articulation. This was their chance to sort of correct that, and they didn't, and I think that's a real shame, because I don't think it would have been difficult to sort of retool that. In fact, I've seen some very good customs. Overall then, I think this is a pretty nice set if you're a huge Ninth Doctor fan. If you're not, if you're just more of a casual fan, and you've already got a Ninth Doctor and you've got a Rose figure, then I don't think you're missing an awful lot if you decide to pass on this set. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.